Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Dust swirled in the dim light, casting a pale haze over the cracked pavement as Ethan trudged forward, his boots grinding against the broken road. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, a barren wasteland, once vibrant and full of life, now nothing more than scorched earth and jagged ruin. The sun, or what remained of it behind the ash-choked sky, hung low and blood-red, bathing everything in a suffocating heat. Every step was a struggle. His pack felt heavier than it had a day before, the water supply dangerously low. But Ethan moved forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon. In the distance, the remnants of a city loomed like the skeletal remains of a giant, its twisted metal and crumbling concrete stretching toward the heavens. Somewhere within that maze of decay lay what he sought, havoc. The last refuge, so the rumors said, a place untouched by the fallout where clean water flowed and food grew freely. Ethan had clung to those rumors like every other desperate soul left on this forsaken planet. He paused to adjust the tattered map, a relic of the old world, now more duct tape and guesswork than cartography. The markings were crude, but one thing was clear: he was close. The map had led him this far through desolation and danger. Yet even now, he couldn't fully trust it. Maps could lie, people could lie, but his instincts, they'd kept him alive. A faint rumble broke the silence. Ethan froze, his heart quickening. His hand instinctively reached for the worn handle of the rifle slung across his back. He crouched behind a rusted-out car frame, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved, only the distant hum of the wind carrying the eerie whispers of the wasteland. He held his breath, listening. There a shadow shifted near the edge of the ruins, too far away to make out details, but it was no beast. It moved with purpose, and that meant one thing: bandits. They were out there, always watching, always hunting, and now they were on his trail. Ethan ducked, lower his pulse, pounding in his ears. Bandits weren't like the beasts or the radiation-mutated creature. Those things attacked out of instinct or hunger. Bandits, they attacked because they enjoyed it. They would tear apart a man for his water, his boots, or just for the thrill of it. He had to keep moving. Ethan shouldered his pack and slid out from behind the car, keeping low as he darted across the road. The ruins provided some cover, jagged walls and collapsed buildings rising like tombstones around him. He weaved through the debris, his senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the acrid stench of radiation hanging heavy. It clung to everything, burning his throat as he breathed through the ragged cloth he used as a mask. His Geiger counter clicked faintly at his belt, a constant reminder of the invisible death that lurked everywhere. The ruins swallowed him as he moved deeper into the city here. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant creak of metal or the scurry of something unseen in the shadows. His grip on his rifle tightened. Hours passed, the light dimming as the sun sank lower, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. He hadn't seen the bandits again, but he knew they were there, lurking. He could feel their eyes on him. Up ahead, he spotted a bunker, half buried beneath rubble. It looked intact, rare in this part of the world. If he could get inside, it might offer shelter for the night. More importantly, it might have supplies. Ethan approached cautiously, his rifle at the ready. The door was slightly ajar, a good sign. If it had been looted, it would be wide open, or worse, booby-trapped. He nudged the door with his boot, the metal groaning in protest. Inside, it was dark, the air stale but not unbearable. He flicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The bunker was small, no more than a single room with a table, some scattered supplies, and a bedroll in the corner. A military pack lay abandoned near the wall. Ethan moved toward it, his heart quickening. Military gear meant ration packs, clean water, and maybe, if he was lucky, ammo. He knelt beside the pack and rummaged through it, a half-full canteen. Score, he unscrewed the cap and took a careful sip, the cool water like a balm to his parched throat. There were some old energy bars, mostly crumbs, but still edible. He pocketed them. Then he saw it, a small black data pad, tucked into the side pocket of the back. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled it out, turning it over in his hand. Most tech from the old world was junk now, fried by the nuclear pulses or rendered useless without power. But if this still worked, Ethan tapped the screen, nothing, dead. Just like everything else in this world. He sighed and slid it back into the pack. It was probably just as well. Whatever information it held, it likely wasn't good news. A faint noise outside the bunker made him freeze. He rose slowly, his rifle gripped tightly. The door creaked open, just a sliver, but enough for him to see the silhouette of a man, a bandit, no doubt, armed with a makeshift spear. Behind him, another figure lurked, and another. Ethan cursed under his breath. They'd found him. The bandits entered cautiously, their leader in front, scanning the room. Well, the leader said, his voice grating and full of malice. Look what we have here. A little rat hiding in the bunker. Ethan didn't respond, keeping his back to the wall, his rifle aimed squarely at the leader's chest. The leader grinned, revealing teeth yellowed and rotting. Easy now, friend. We don't want any trouble. Just looking for a little company on this fine evening. The other bandits laughed, stepping closer, their weapons drawn. Ethan's ass finger tightened on the trigger. Back off, he growled. The leader raised his hands in mock surrender. No need to get hasty. We're all friends here. Just thought we'd be sharing your little treasure trove. Ain't that right, boys? The bandits closed it. Ethan fired. The shot rang out in the confined space, the recoil jarring his arm. The leader staggered back, clutching his chest as blood seeped through his fingers. He collapsed with a wet gasp. Chaos erupted. The remaining bandits lunged at him, but Ethan was faster. He swung his rifle like a club, smashing the stock into the nearest man, Sathi. Another bandit tackled him, knocking him to the ground, but Ethan rolled with the momentum, pulling a knife from his boot and plunging it into the man's side. The bandits screamed, his grip loosening just long enough for Ethan to shove him off. He scrambled to his feet, panting, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. The last bandit stood across from him, eyes wide with panic. Without a word, the man turned and bolted out the door. Ethan didn't chase him. His breath came in ragged gasps as he wiped the blood from his face. He glanced down at the bodies littering the floor, his hands trembling. The leader was dead, a pool of crimson spreading beneath it. He needed to move. The bandit's scream would have attracted attention, if not from more bandits, then from worse things. Ethan grabbed the supplies he could carry, slinging the military pack over his shoulder. He gave one last look to the bunker, then stepped back into the wasteland. The night was falling, the stars faint behind the clouds of dust and radiation. His muscles ached, the adrenaline fading, but there was no time to rest. He had to find haven. He moved through the ruins, keeping to the shadows, his senses alert. The wasteland was alive with danger at night, more than just bandits. The mutants came out after dark, drawn to any sign of life. As if on cue, a low growl echoed through the empty streets. Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. He scanned the area, his flashlight off to avoid attracting attention. The growl came again, closer this time. He unslung his rifle, the barrel steady despite the tremor in his hand. The sound of claws scraping against concrete sent a shiver down his spine. Then out of the darkness, it emerged. The mutant was massive, at least twice the size of a man. Its skin mottled and grotesque, twisted by years of radiation. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and its mouth was filled with jagged teeth. It moved on all fours, its limbs too long and too thin, giving it a nightmarish appearance. Ethan didn't wait for it to close the distance. He fired. The bullet hit its mark, but the creature barely flinched. It roared, charging at him with terrifying speed. Ethan fired again, this time aiming for the head. The mutant staggered, blood spraying from the wound, but it kept coming. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws as they raked through the air where he stood moments before. He hit the ground hard, his breath knocked out of him, but he forced himself and rolled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest as the mutant wheeled around for another attack. Its glowing eyes locked onto him, and it let out a guttural snarl, charging again with its limbs scrabbling across the cracked pavement. Ethan didn't have time to think. He raised his rifle and fired point blank at the creature. Set. The shot rang out, the bullet tearing through its skull with a sickening crunch. The mutant's momentum carried it forward, but it faltered mid-lunge, collapsing at his feet in a heap of twitching limbs. Blood oozed from its wound, pooling on the ground beneath it. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, chest heaving, his ears ringing from the gunfire. The mutant was still its monstrous form, now nothing more than a grotesque carcass in the fading light. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a shaky hand, his body tense and adrenaline still surging through his veins. He needed to move. Even with the mutant dead, its blood would attract others. He couldn't stay in one place for long, slinging his rifle back over his shoulder. He picked up his pace, weaving through the ruins of the city. Every sound, every shadow made him flinch, his senses on high alert for any sign of danger. The wasteland had a way of making you paranoid, and for good reason. As night fully descended, the air grew colder, the oppressive heat of the day giving way to a bone-chilling wind. Ethan pulled his coat tighter around him, his breath visible in the thin air. He kept moving, his muscles aching from exhaustion, but he couldn't afford to stop. Ahead, the cityscape thinned, giving way to open plains of cracked earth and twisted metal. In the distance, a faint glow caught his eye, flickering like a distant fire. It was far off, but it was the only sign of life for miles. Could it be heaven, or was it another bandit camp, waiting to ambush anyone foolish enough to approach? Ethan couldn't be sure, but he had no other choice. His supplies were dwindling, his body pushed to its limit. He needed shelter, food, and water, and if that distant glow meant any of those things, he had to take the risk. He moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as he made his way toward the light. The wind howled around him, carrying with it the distant sounds of the wastelands, its nocturnal predators, but he pressed on. Every step brought him closer, and soon the glow took shape, a small campfire nestled in the remains of what looked like an old half-buried structure. Ethan crouched behind a crumbling wall, scanning the area. 3 figures huddled around the fire, their faces shadowed by the flickering light. They did look like bandits, not armed to the teeth or adorned with the usual patchwork armor. But appearances could be deceiving. He had learned that the hard way more than once. He watched for a few more moments, weighing his options. His body screamed for rest, for warmth, for anything that wasn't the cold, unforgiving wasteland. If they were hostile, he would be outnumbered. But if they were friendly, well, friendly was a word that had lost its meaning out here. No one was really friendly anymore, just opportunistic. Ethan stood slowly, keeping his rifle lowered but ready, and stepped out from behind the wall. "Don't you shoot?" he called out, his voice rough from the dust and exhaustion. The 3 figures immediately looked up, startled, their hands instinctively moving toward the weapons at their side. Ethan held up his hands. "I am just looking for a place to rest." One of them, a woman with short dark hair and a scar running down the side of her face, stood and eyed him warily. "Who are you?" "A traveler," Ethan replied, his gaze shifting between the 3 of them. "I don't want trouble, just passing through." The woman narrowed her eyes, assessing him for a long moment before she glanced at the others. "You alone?" He nodded. "Yeah." She hesitated, then nodded toward the fire. "You can sit, but keep your hands where I can see them." Ethan exhaled slowly, relieved but still cautious. He approached the fire and sat down on the opposite side, feeling the warmth seep into his bone. His hands shook slightly as he reached into his pack and pulled out one of the energy bars he'd scavenged earlier. He unwrapped it and took a bite, chewing slowly, keeping his eyes on the woman. "You don't look like one of Zayn's," she said after a moment, sitting back down and watching him carefully. Ethan shook his head. "I am not." "Good," she spat into the fire. "Bastard's got half the wasteland under his boot. You don't want to cross paths with him." "I've already had the pleasure," Thinkin muttered, thinking back to the bandit leader he had killed in the bunker. The woman raised an eyebrow. "You're lucky you're still breathing then." One of the other figures, a man with a shaggy beard and tired eyes, spoke up. "Where you headed?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering, "I am looking for haven." A brief silence fell over the group. The woman exchanged a look with the bearded man and laughed, though it was a humorless, bitter sound. "Haven? You really believe that place exists?" "I have to," Ethan replied quietly. "It's the only thing keeping me going." The bearded man shook his head. "Ain't he no haven, friend? Just stories people tell themselves to keep from going crazy." Ethan stared into the fire, the flames flickering in his tired eye. He had heard that before, but something in his gut told him heaven was real. It had to be. He had come too far, endured too much to believe otherwise. The woman studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Well, you are welcome to stay here tonight, but we were moving out at first light." "Where are you going?" Ethan asked. "North," she replied, "farther from the radiation zones. Less mutants, less bandits." Ethan nodded, grateful for the shelter, even if it was temporary. His aching closed his eyes. He was too tired to care about the dangers that might come in the night. He just needed a few hours of sleep. The sound of the crackling fire and the distant howl of the wind was the last thing he heard as sleep finally overtook him. Ethan woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the broken walls of the structure. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly in the morning chill. He blinked, disoriented for a moment, before the harsh reality of the wasteland came rushing back to him. He was still alive, still on the edge of survival. The woman and her companions were already packing up their gear, moving quietly and efficiently. She glanced over at Ethan as he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You still heading to heaven?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "I have to." She nodded, slinging her pack over her shoulder. "Well, good luck. You will need it." Without another word, the three of them set off, disappearing into the hazy morning light, leaving Ethan alone once more. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion still clinging to his bones. His legs ached, his throat dry and scratchy, but he had no choice. He had to keep moving. He shouldered his pack, checking his supplies, what little he had left, and set off in the direction of haven. The map was still tucked safely in his pocket, though it was fraying at the edges, barely holding together. He followed the markings, tracing a path through the wasteland that led deeper into unknown territory. The hours stretched on, the sun rising higher in the sky, its oppressive heat beating down on him once again. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his gauge counter clicked steadily at his waist, a constant reminder of the radiation that lingered in the air. The landscape began to change as he moved farther from the city. The ruins gave way to vast stretches of barren land, cracked and dry, with twisted metal structures jutting out of the ground like the bones of some long-dead beast. The air felt heavier here, thicker with radiation, and the mutants became more frequent, lurking in the shadows. Ethan kept his rifle ready, his senses sharp. He couldn't afford any more encounters with the creatures, not in his current state. Every step felt like a battle, his body screaming for rest, for relief. But heaven was close, he could feel it, or at least he wanted to believe he could. By midday, he spotted something on the horizon, a glint of metal reflecting the harsh sunlight. He squinted, his heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a bandit camp or a mutant day. It looked like a gate, a massive fortified gate surrounded by high walls. Could it be heaven? Ethan quickened his pace, his pulse racing. As he drew closer, the details became clearer. The gate was old, weathered by time and radiation, but it was intact. And beyond it, the walls stretched high, made of reinforced steel. It looked like a fortress, a stronghold, but there were no guards, no movement. He approached cautiously, his rifle raised, scanning the area. The gate loomed before him, silent and imposing.